Hey guys, welcome to Health Science Explained. So this week I'm speaking to Nigel Harris. So Nigel is the Chief Science Advisor for Exercise New Zealand. He is also an Associate Professor at the Auckland University of Technology, researching and lecturing applied exercise science for health. In addition, he's also the Associate Dean of Postgraduate Research, and is on the Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences. So Nigel is also working with CureKids to improve health outcomes for our youth. I do want to kind of preface this discussion by saying a lot of this will be focused likely largely on New Zealand, but it's probably applicable to other areas within the world, of course. So is there any part of that isn't quite accurate at the moment, or anything you want to add to that?
James, sorry, that's my dog that's just decided to jump on a beanbag, and I'm sure you just got that on the microphones. She's been asleep for 2 hours and has just decided. I guess you're picking that up.
That's no problem. Like that's
She'll stop in a minute. It's quite noisy in here. Sorry about that.
No worries, you're right. Should we rewind?
Oh, it's up to you. Apologies. It's quite noisy this end, and yeah, so yeah.
No worries. It doesn't sound too bad on my end.
Okay, all right. She's finished now, so yeah.
Yeah. We'll just keep going. So what was there any part of that introduction that isn't quite accurate, or anything that's changed over the years?
No, that's really accurate. Thanks, James. I appreciate you having me on the podcast, and looking forward to having a chat about things exercise. I'm always keen to engage in those discussions.
Yeah. I think it'll be a really interesting discussion. And I guess an interesting place to start out might be generally what is your conception of health? What do you think? What kind of aspects fit into that for you, and how do you think has that changed over time as well?
Well, that's a big question. Look, I think that it's clearly a very holistic thing. So even though my gig is exercise, it's certainly not just physical health, although I'd say full physical nourishment is a key part of it. But obviously your general well-being is key as well. And so I'm really interested in that as well, the effects of exercise on how it makes you feel, not just how it makes you function. So that's certainly part of it. So I suppose it's fulfillment, it's happiness, it's place in society, it's social connections, it's all of that. But of course, a big part of it for me is also physical nourishment. And that's the different ways that you can move to make you feel and function better.
I absolutely love that definition. I think as we define health more and more, we get to a much better place where, like, as you kind of said, like it's happiness, it's fulfillment. And then like the aspect of that you tend to be able to focus on the most seems to be the physical nourishment side of it. And I really like that, that description, physical nourishment, rather than exercise for whatever thing we're trying to get, whatever adaptation or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's a term I love too. I don't actually know who first coined it. I think I might have used it once and thought I invented it, but I didn't, because it goes back a wee way. I think it really represents really well what we're trying to get out of physical exercise. So often we can focus on aerobic or anaerobic or strength, but full physical nourishment means that you're moving in a variety of different ways, and it's satisfying all of the different physical demands. So that's neuromuscular, that's skeletal, and it's also the mental, the psychological.
100%. I think one of the things that I think it could be interesting to start out with, when you think about, like, if we think of let's just focus on the context of New Zealand as a society. What do you think are some of the things that we can change, or the initiatives that we can use that can increase the rates at which people exercise, or the biggest things that we need to change that will improve health overall?
Okay, again, that's a massive question, but I want to ask you to clarify. Are you talking about getting people more generally physically active, or are you talking about getting people into exercise? Because to me, of course they're related, but they're quite distinctive. And exercise to me is a subcomponent of physical activity, and you're dealing with structured and semi-structured. So you're typically dealing with people who have made the decision to actually do something, whether or not it's walking or, lifting or going to a class or whatever. So to me, that would be the definition of exercise. And I think that's probably a separate question to trying to increase physical activity levels in the population. Of course, that's around getting off the couch and just moving more, and probably sitting a lot less. And I think that although they're related, they are distinctive questions. So it's almost like once you're dealing with exercise, you're dealing with someone that's made the decision to seek a way to do something in a structured manner, whereas the physical activity is a little bit broader and it's more around incidental activity that occurs as things like activities of daily living or active transport. So you might not be moving for movement's sake or exercising for a workout, but you are more physically active. Now, the answer to that first question around physical activity, because that's what you're asking, right?
Yeah, I'd love to hear both, and we can kind of dive into both, because I think it's
right. Sure.
I love that distinction.
Yeah. Well, I think if I could answer that question, it would be a career-defining moment, and maybe a Nobel Prize or something. I don't know, but getting people more active is the subject of a huge amount of research because you're dealing with behavior change. That's not easy, and you're dealing with a massive the complications of environmental factors. I mean, we've done so amazingly well to engineer movement out of our lives, haven't we? And of course, ancestrally, we could speculate on all sorts of reasons for that. We're intuitively, meant not to move, and we try to avoid it, etc., etc. And in modern society, we have machines and ways to move that involve almost no movement. You can get into a car without pressing a button, and I can make things in the kitchen and it's without any elbow grease, etc. And it would be sometimes with students, I use the example, how many people do you know of whose day consists of, after getting up from sleeping, they'll sit down at the breakfast table for breakfast, then they'll sit in either the car or the bus to go to work. And when they get to the office, they sit down all day in front of a screen. When they're tired from the screen, they'll go and sit down in the lunchroom or the cafeteria. Then they'll go back to the desk. They'll then sit down in the car to go home. And when they get home, they're a bit tired, so they'll sit down for their meal. And the average person, I don't know what the exact statistic is in New Zealand at the moment, but will watch quite a lot of television or engage in a lot more screen time. Now, when you express it like that, it's a bit laborious, but it sounds extreme, doesn't it? And you would sit back and look at that objectively and say, how can you possibly not move at all in a day? And apart from just transitioning from one seat to the other. But the reality is that is what we seem to be doing a lot in modern life, unfortunately. So probably the biggest question and the biggest bang for the buck is just to get people moving more. And certainly as part of that, engineering more activities of daily living, maybe it's active transport, back into life is the number one thing. And that's probably the number one health benefit too. I wouldn't say that just doing that would be fully physically nourishing or nourishing for all those other factors we've just talked about. But in terms of the health impact, to mitigate and attenuate, prevent all of the issues with being sedentary that we know occur, moving more in general. And so, that strikes to the core of public health campaigns. And there's been all sorts of them in New Zealand and internationally, I'm sure. 10,000 steps a day, walk more, and you name it. Maybe wearable technologies helped a little bit with that too. But, and I think there's a general understanding in the public that you're supposed to move. Despite that, evidently, we do not move enough. And it manifests as all these very unfortunate lifestyle diseases, which are actually, for the most part, quite preventable. Obviously, some of them aren't. They're random, but with some more movement and obviously a little thing called nutrition too, we can make a massive impact. But on the movement front, the physical activity, just moving more. How you get people to do that? Wow. I mean, it's behavior, it's psychology, it's sociology, it's politics, it's socio-political, and the list goes on.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I can really answer that very succinctly. I wish I could. Yeah. There's trials all over the place with all sorts of different programs, and they have varying levels of success. Often what happens is people will revert back to that sort of those unfortunately mostly sedentary patterns again. So finding that recipe to get people moving more habitually for more than just a program length of time, don't know the answer. I wish I did.
It's very, very difficult, right? Because I guess the environment we currently live in is not, as you said, like it's really not set up for us to exercise, or not even, I guess, as you kind of outlined, it's like there's exercise and then there's just having an active lifestyle. By the essence of, like, for example, we now use a washing machine. We don't scrub our washing on a board. I don't actually know what those are called, but what, like, just for example, and I think the lengths I don't know if we will ever climb this kind of mountain, but the lengths that society would have to go to return to a place where physical activity is kind of ingrained. And then you have as you said, like the food side of things, where basically the same thing has happened. This technology we're fighting an uphill battle on kind of both fronts, because most work is not very physically intensive. And it is definitely really unfortunate. Is there anything, because I'd love to get to the deliberate exercise component in a second, but is there anything that you think you see as quite promising in that realm that might be able to improve the I guess the rates of general movement within the population?
Yeah, I have some great colleagues, very clever people that work in active transport and the built environment and urban planning. So I think greater consideration for how to get people moving more, and I suppose particularly with the current crisis with the cost of transportation, it might help. But I live in suburban Auckland, which for those outside New Zealand is the major city, and its population of, I don't know, what is it, 1.5, 2 million?
Something like that.
Yeah, and in suburbia, going out without a car in many places is treacherous, smelly, and unpleasant. And so whilst I'd love to be able to hop on my bike, I love biking, I'd be keen to bike everywhere all the time. It also unfortunately rains for 3 to 4 months of the year, so that can be a little bit off-putting. But it's not safe, it's not pleasant, and it's not something that would encourage anyone to do it. And so you look at that and go, we've designed this city to be so dependent on the motor car, and there are obvious other implications of that too in terms of climate change. How about we look at that and go, let's try to get people moving more in their normal circles of life. And so people have called it the, what is it? The 10-minute city, the something minute city. I've forgotten how many minutes it is, but it's the idea is that you live and work within a certain area and you don't need to have too much transport to get there. And if I want to get somewhere, I can do that without having to get in a car, which is sedentary and polluting. So, I think that holds a lot of potential, but of course it's very hard to retrospectively fit cities with environmentally friendly and people and bike friendly situations. So they're moving for work, for just general transport. Has been done, and we've seen cities close abroad, and it's brought people in. There's been a lot of criticism over closing cities off to cars or centre of cities, but you look at what happens when that actually occurs. The place becomes vibrant, it becomes a pleasant place to be. People walk there, people bike there, or jump on a connecting bus. So I think that's got a huge amount of potential. I don't have enough patience for that as my colleagues do. I wish I did, because you're dealing with politics, you're dealing with politicians, you're dealing with money, dealing with councils, and as soon as you say that word, it's going to slow, So I'd like the patience of my colleagues, because I think that has a lot of potential. If we can engineer that back into our environment, particularly our urban environment where most of us live, then we're onto something, because then we just move as part of day-to-day living.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Yeah, I've got a good colleague, Scott Duncan, and Erica Hinkson. They're both working in the physical activity in the built environment. They're looking at how planners can try to engineer these things and better in things like new subdivisions, for example. So, if we can do that on the front foot, even better. Doing it on the back foot's possible, but harder, particularly in some massive suburban areas where you just don't have room for bikes and things like that. So, look, I think that's got potential. There's not a lot else that springs to mind instantly for a quick fix. I suppose at the core of it, people have to believe that it's good for them, because if it's constantly extrinsic and people are only moving because they're told they absolutely have to, it's never going to work long term, is it?
Yeah.
So looking at behavior change science and trying to find a way to get people to not just know that it's good for you, but believe it, and then be more intrinsically driven to actually move or find ways to move, because they can if they want to. But behavior change science is a difficult one, and it's it's well beyond my wheelhouse. That's obviously the core of it, though. If someone, what motivation's like, if someone wants to do it, they'll find a way, despite anything. It doesn't matter about the built environment or whatever. Yeah. People believe in moving and want to move and start to understand that it makes them feel good, then you're onto something. But getting to that point, how to do it, I don't know. It's obviously multifactorial.
Yeah, 100%. And I definitely relate to what you said about where it becomes this political thing. Like, for example, the same thing happens in nutrition, where it's 100% an uphill battle there as well, where, we can't just expect companies to put health first. And like, it would be great if they did, but I think that's going to have to be education in terms of nutrition and exercise. I think it's fantastic, but it won't get rid of all these barriers, and it won't get rid of, it will not, as you said, like, it won't set up the environment to intrinsically promote health. And I think that's a really, really tough place to get to. Because,
I think if you talk to people, I don't think anyone would say, well, I didn't actually know that we're supposed to move. I thought it was okay to sit down for 16 hours a day. I don't think that many people would say that. There have been so many public health campaigns and media, all sorts of things. I mean, even commercial products, of course, people are exposed to that, even if they don't consume public health campaigns from government organizations, for example. They see commercial products promoting this. So I think people know. But jumping from that point where people know it's good for them and should do it to really believing that it affects them personally, that's the quantum leap.
100%. I definitely. So I'm working as a health coach in a medical center at the moment. I spoke to Karen a while ago about health coaching, and it was quite fascinating to see how, well, it's really interesting to see how, if you can, it's like getting someone to the point where they'll take the time for themselves to go for a walk it's like a quantum leap. It can be really, really difficult, especially when they're stressed, they're struggling on the financial side of things. They've got 3 different kids, and then like all these different things weighing on them, where it's like their health ends up getting put last. And if the environment doesn't naturally promote health, then I think it's a very, very very difficult thing to see. But I guess,
and making that start, I think, is the key, isn't it? Because just getting a start on something, on any habit or a job that you procrastinated on, for example, is the hardest bit. But once you just make a start, then you can be onto something. Getting to that point, though, and then maintaining it, of course,
100%.
Evidently quite difficult for modern human beings.
Yeah. I think we're I think, given all the effort that we're putting into it, I think there is progress being made. And I think it's easy to, when I was maybe 2 years ago, I was very pessimistic about the outcome, the likelihood of change. But I think I am, I believe now more that we can make change, but it's not going to be a 5-year process. It's like a 30, 40, 50 year, or however long it's going to be.
It's incremental, and we're always going to leave some behind. On the potential front, now, I should mention wearables. I do think there is, they are becoming ubiquitous and accessible. You can get cheap, obviously, wrist-worn devices and whatnot. Whether or not they're always 100% accurate is besides the point. And they do seem to motivate people. I know there's more and more research coming from that, but certainly anecdotally, we can all name people who like to keep up with their exercise circles, or like to be told they've reached a certain number of steps a day. And whether or not that works for a very long term, I don't know. But, I think wearables have got a lot of potential. And particularly as they start to produce more accurate metrics from it, real-time monitoring and things, we've seen bio patches and whatnot emerge. So that sort of stuff might drive people, but I think still some more work to do there.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree as well, because every now and then you might know someone who's an acquaintance of yourself or something like that, and then you see them, they might mention, I got an Apple Watch or something. And then, like, for instance, if I gave my parents Apple Watches, I think they would, if I had $1,000 or whatever to give them, then I think that would motivate. My mom would then say, oh, I haven't closed my rings. And I think that would motivate people like my parents, for example, to just sort of think, oh, I haven't closed my rings today. And if you can gamify it, I think it can, just that little extra prompt. And I also do, I do think it's quite promising. But I guess, so one of the things, I guess the other part of this conversation is the more deliberate bouts of exercise, where that's sort of self-selected and said, I'm going to join a CrossFit gym, I'm going to join a normal gym, or I'm going to drawing things like that. How do you think, I guess because there are limitations to that, right? And do you think this is something we should be pushing within society, or what kind of role do you think that plays to improve overall health? Because I guess the thing is, if we compare it to trying to say, because people often say, like, move more, eat less when it comes to obesity, and it's
Yeah,
very
it's a
hard
pretty
to,
nebulous sort of a recommendation, isn't it? What does that actually mean? But yeah.
I think it's very, I just don't know what role, like as you kind of touched on before, it's like we have these campaigns that say, hey, exercise is good for you. But I guess the problem is we already kind of know that. And yeah,
So your question is the role of exercise facilities in that, and getting people
deliberate.
Yeah. Well, I think it certainly plays a part. I mean, structured, supervised exercise training is hugely beneficial. Now, if we think, for example, about resistance training, it's been publicly recommended that you resistance train in some way for many, many years. And there's been no contention over it, unlike, for example, HIIT in the more contemporary literature. People seem to either love or hate HIIT and think it's either the silver bullet or the enemy of all physical activity. It's actually not either one of those. Resistance training has been in public health recommendations for years. It's hard to do, and it's hard to know what to do. You do see things like just, do some body weight squats or grab a tin of baked beans and do some bicep curls. And all right, well, if that's a good start, but we know that that's not going to cut it for too long. Partly because it's going to get boring, and partly because you just need some sort of fundamental progressive overload. So getting people to do resistance training, in some way, I think structured exercise facilities play a huge role there. There's also the group exercise component. Many, many people like the social aspect. There's the music, the social aspect, and having the instructor, not having to think about it. The question is access to that, and we should never assume, as probably two people who would just seek that and be well and truly prepared to resource it, although I have a home gym now, that people have access to that. So can afford it, either the time and or the money. And that, of course, is the limiting factor. So then we come to sort of community-based programs, and they have potential. But again, they still need resourcing and organising. So I think they play a huge role, and it's been really encouraging to see the uptake of membership and exercise facilities in New Zealand. I'm a huge believer in the exercise industry. The role of personal trainers, movement coaches, exercise coaches, fitness instructors, whatever you want to call them, the group exercise instructors, that group and those facilities have had a massive impact on public health. I think that's undeniable. But there are going to be people that can't do that or won't for whatever reason. So the reach of that still has some limitations. It's to be encouraged, but we should never work on the assumption that people are going to do that or can do that.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think that's a really good perspective, because like if I work in the medical center that I work at it is in quite an affluent area, so people can afford more things, but it's still a pretty high percentage of my patients who I can't afford a gym, and they don't want to pay for that. And I think, as you said, like we definitely can't assume the access and just think, oh, just fit it into your budget. Because it's not just the amount of money that you have to pay for that. It's also, I think, in terms of resistance training, personally, I think the amount of knowledge available to the public, I don't know if it's adequate.
No, I don't think it is either, James. It's in those recommendations, and it's all kind of nebulous, because it's something along the lines of, exert your muscles, or, do some sort of resistance strength training, and you can do it in a variety of different ways. And sure, you can, but the motivation and understanding required to do that on a consistent basis and do it in a way that doesn't get boring. And I'm talking about both psychological and physiologically boring, because just doing exactly the same movement at exactly the same load, you don't have to be an exercise scientist to know, A, that it's going to get boring, and B, it's just going to not continue to work at the same rate. So you need the understanding and the motivation to change that up and to progress it a little bit, to keep it interesting, and also to continue to have an effect in some way. because of course it's the effects that are going to lead to people to want to continue to do it. And I think that strikes to the core of motivation as well. You've got the belief with exercise, it's not an instant thing. We're so used to purchasing something.
Yeah.
And it's a product or a pill, as is so often touted in the health industry, unfortunately, and they have their place, and you get an effect, and it's pretty instant. We buy something, we want something for our money. Well, when you train, of course, you need to apply a level of stimulus over a period of time on a reasonably consistent basis, as everyone would know. And so it might take a little bit of time to get over the initial shock of exercising, to get into that habit, and then realize, you know what, I'm feeling fitter, I'm getting a bit stronger, I actually feel quite good. Although I'm a bit fatigued after my workouts, afterwards I actually feel all right. And on a consistent basis, I'm starting to miss it. Getting to that point is the transition, isn't it? And I think a little bit of structure and supervision can really help there, and particularly in terms of resistance training. If I go to a social occasion and I go to a barbecue or something, and you're standing around and talking to some friends of friends, and they say, what do you do? And I say, well, I'm an academic. And the next question is, what's your topic? And most people think I'm going to say maths or engineering. I don't know, maybe rocket science or something, but they'll say, it's exercise for health. And they go, oh, wow, really? Is that an academic area? So the next question is, their perception is, so you're into sports science, obviously do you train athletes? And I'm like, no, well, I like sport, but what I'm interested in is how exercise affects health. So if they're still engaged in the conversation at that point, the next question is going to be, what sort of exercise should I do? And my first answer is, we'll move more and, just get off the couch. That's a bit boring. Yeah. So the next thing is, look, resistance training is where there's so much bang for the buck. If you can get yourself in a position where you overload your muscles, I don't say neuromuscular system, you say muscles, in some way on a reasonably consistent basis, and it doesn't take long, and you don't have to do it every day, the bang for the buck there is huge. It really is. But getting people to do that and understand how to do it on a long-term basis, that's much harder. And I think the exercise industry has a huge role to play there. Yeah. So I'd love to see in the future a political environment whereby that's supported in some way, and it's done preventatively, not just in reaction to dysfunction. So we're seeing insurance companies now pay for things like clinical exercise physiologists because they're trying to get people back working to function again. They're also now starting to acknowledge that if they can do that preventatively, then there's power in that too, because if you can deal to it before it occurs, it's actually a good dollar investment for them. And so maybe in a utopian distant future, we'll get to the point where the exercise industry is supported for people so they can have a little bit of advice. It's not, necessarily personal training every session type of thing, but access to that. And that would include the support. So that's the motivation and encouragement that people need, but it's also the actual prescription advice, especially around aspects like resistance training, or it might be even better advice about how to do it at home if they can't or won't go to an exercise facility, because some people won't, and it's not just about money.
Yeah.
I think there is still a lot of stigma, unfortunately, involved with some exercise facilities in particular. It's got so much better over the last several years, the exercise facility environment. There's a lot of different options. It's been really encouraging and supportive, as opposed to the stereotype of not that many years ago when it tended to be the gym junkies and as a real crude stereotype, the big blokes and the skinny woman, and you sort of saw that quite a bit in fitness centers. Now it's a much better cross representation of society.
100%. I find even I've been obviously lived in Auckland my whole life, been to a lot of gyms around Auckland in particular, and you do see it changing. And obviously it depends where you go, but I think the average gym now is a lot more accepting. And less, there's way less judgment. I think it's not perfect. But yeah, I 100% agree. And I do think that I really hope to improve the landscape of the access to resistance training. So I think that's at least what I see as the main barrier, because people walk in a gym and they see 50 different machines and they don't know. Then there's dumbbells and barbells, and I think it's very hard to know what to do, and then you don't want to do it wrong. And I think if someone wants to go and learn about it, if they go for online resources, that can be, it's very, very hit or miss. I think the landscape, if you look at from a nutrition aspect, the nutrition information landscape, I think is pretty poor at the moment. And then I think from exercise, it's okay, but there's a lot of obviously bad information on the internet, for example. And then maybe this is an unfair characteristic, but I'd love to hear what you think. But I do think the average, I think the distance between the best personal trainer, for example, and the worst personal trainer is much larger than, say, for example, the best podiatrist and the worst podiatrist. If we took, or physiotherapist.
Still quite different industries, aren't they? When you're talking about those registered health professions, they have a long background of registration and the sort of qualifications and compliance that come with it. I think qualifications in personal training have come a long way. But of course, it's not at the point of a profession like physiotherapy or podiatry. But you could argue neither are a lot of the salaries in the exercise industry either.
Yeah.
So that could be part of it, although personal training can still attract, some pretty good income. Although it's not as easy as a lot of young personal trainers, I think, perceive it to be. So it takes some dedication and perseverance and combination of skills, including business skills, which a lot of people trainers don't account for when they first go into it.
100%. Yeah, I've been running my own online personal training thing for a bit, and you realize pretty quickly that if you don't upgrade your business skills, you are going to earn $0 pretty much.
And I think that strikes to the core of where there is an attraction to a lot of education in the fitness industry or the exercise industry. And that is that trainers obviously have to run a business and they're trying to earn an income. And so often what they'll be doing is looking for ways or packages that will improve that income. And that's fully understandable. I'm not criticizing that. That might compromise then the level of attention that's paid to some of the science that's needed, or just fundamental prescription, understanding of physiology and pathophysiology in particular. So when things go wrong, because there are a lot of people who have rumbling issues under the surface that trainers need to deal with, from overweight to pre-diabetes and etc. And so understanding that's really important, but of course a busy trainer in terms of further education is going to be drawn more to things potentially that will help to increase their business. And again, that's not a criticism. It's just something that I think compounds the time that trainers are prepared to invest and money in learning other aspects that underpin a very crucial role that they play.
100%. And I think it's very easy. I don't know. I feel as though I feel like personal trainers do get a lot of slack. They get a lot of people. It's very easy to critique personal trainers, I think, but it's not very easy to be a personal trainer. And I don't think, I personally don't think the system for their self-education is set up amazingly just yet. And I think
the Register of Exercise Professionals in New Zealand, and there is an international confederation. I mean, they've done great work, and it's come a long way. But of course, there's always work to do, and it's an industry that's still evolving, and it has come a long way. And you see that manifest in what it's like to enter an exercise facility. But you look at the people engaged in structured exercise now, and you have to say it's much broader than what you would have seen some years ago, and that's a really good thing. And the exercise industry is to be applauded for that. Partly they've moved with the market, but partly they know that it's about attracting more people than just those who would sort of seek a gym down the morning after it was burnt down. They'd be picking through the embers for a barbell. Those were the people in the past, and that's great. So it's attracting the rest and making it an environment where they're comfortable to go to. And I think a lot has happened, and that's been great to see. Still more work to do. Yeah,
100%. And I think, I'm not sure where, because obviously it's something that I've only been, I studied podiatry before I studied exercise science and health science, and I've only really been trying to understand where the industry is at for probably 2.5 years, something like that. And I think, I as you said, I think we've probably come a long way, but I guess as someone who hasn't been in it for that long, it's easy for me to just look at the faults. And I think, that's unfortunate, because as you said, there's a lot of things that have improved.
Well, identifying faults is one of the first steps to seeking improvement, isn't it? So you need to do that. But it's a wonderfully positive thing what structured exercise and exercise facilities do for people. That doesn't mean it works for everyone all the time, or it's the answer to a public health crisis. I think it's certainly a place. And as I said, it would be great to see an environment where it is supported more because of its preventive potency. The issue with prevention and political support and financial support, it's much harder because it's slow burning, and it's very hard to throw a lot of money at something you think is going to help prevent a condition when you don't really know for a number of years, and by then perhaps you've been booted out or everyone's forgotten that you've given that money for it.
Yeah, 100%, which is unfortunate. I wish, I would love to see the day when we reach that utopian society where gyms are free, or whatever the program has to be. Or like, I think a good example of this that I've seen work well in my practice as a health coach, not a personal trainer, is green prescription. And I would love to get your thoughts on, and maybe I'll elaborate on that a little bit. So green prescription in New Zealand is sort of I know you know this, I'm more explaining to the listeners. It's sort of a program where you get discounted access to exercise facilities, sometimes nutritionists, I believe. You can get quite a range of things that help you either return to exercise, and I believe it's a 3-month program for the most part. And I've seen it work pretty well. But I would love to get your thoughts on green prescription as a modality and programs like that.
I think circling back to something you said about the utopian society and it being free, I think people still need a little bit of skin in the game, because there has been research to show where if it's completely free, it's taken for granted. But perhaps just breaking down that as one of the barriers maybe would be more to the point. So, going back to the programs that seek to support, it's great to see, and it is good to see that support being given for it. I don't know it's fully understood. So greater promotion of it, maybe, greater understanding of how it works.
Yeah, I do see that. I see that in my practice, where I think even, so I work with a lot of GPs, and I think, I don't know if the confidence in the program is lacking, or because I know not to get specifically in green prescription, because I know there's a lot of different organizations that do it, but I think often, I think there's a little bit of either lack of understanding of what it does, or if it's free. And I think from the patient side of things, I think there's lack of understanding there. And I really think it's important that, like for instance, my role as a health coach is to help when a GP sends me a patient to say, hey, maybe they would be good for green prescription. Try to get them bought into the process. And I think that has worked really well for me with my patients. But it is definitely, I do agree that it shouldn't be free, because it's hard to, like, the amount of gyms who have like a 80% don't attend the gym, something like that. So even then,
Your cost is just one thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
people still need to believe it and want to do it. And you would think that having some sort of referral from a GP, or a bit of a shock, perhaps it's an early onset of a condition or symptoms that something is going worse, you would think that would be a bit of a kick in the backside for people, but often it takes something much more serious. So it goes to show you that human nature, for whatever reason, for many people, we're up against it to intuitively want to move more. And so you just have to look for ways to do it. And those programs certainly help, but people have still got to want to do it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that can't last forever. So the idea is, of course, you set them up for that to get it going. Then what happens after that? And again, that's not a question.
Yeah, I do. I'm quite very keen on health coaching as a modality, and that's partly why I'm working in this job, so I can understand how much utility this has, because I think it has a massive upside. Like, all my consults are free, and it can often be advice, but we always try and set a plan. Like, hey, what's the one thing you're going to change? Cool, I'll see you in 2 weeks or whatever.
So ongoing monitoring helps, doesn't it? But I think also the social engagement. So when you're accountable to peers, that's certainly got a huge amount of potential, because the vast majority of people would prefer to exercise with someone else, or at least have accountability to mates. That could be socio and cultural. And so I think if you're setting up options or availability of facilities or programs like that, that also has a great deal of potential.
100%.
There are some people, of course, who, you know, like to exercise on their own to zone out. I'd be one of them, get on a mountain bike in a forest, you know.
Yeah.
But for most people, I think having that social aspect, and that includes accountability to mates who will give you a bit of a hard time, which is different to the doctor saying, I think you should go and do this.
Yes, the doctor will not.
Yeah.
It's not within the scope of practice to give you a hard time if you're not exercising.
No, that's right. And so then, you know, it strikes to the core of, well, what's going to get people more engaged? And certainly enjoyment is part of it. There's no doubt about that. If people are only taking it like a bitter tasting medicine that they hate, it's never going to stick. I think the flip side of that, though, is it's not binary. I think we have to be careful to say that someone has to love all exercise to want to do it. Because if you think about resistance training towards the end of a set that's going reasonably close to failure, for most people, that's going to be the type of activity they've spent their life trying to avoid. We buy machines so that we don't have to experience neuromuscular fatigue, you know. So then we're telling someone to go and do 10 to 15 repetitions close to failure of whatever movement it is. Now, saying that they're going to love that, or that they have to love every moment of that to enjoy it, I think is fundamentally flawed. So enjoyment has to be a factor, but I do wonder about the psychology of it when people start to understand how it makes them feel, not just during it, but as a result of doing it with some consistency. So that's getting some results, but that's also the broader psychological aspect of the feeling of self-efficacy, the confidence, the reward that comes from actually doing it. And then, of course, there is the physiological, the potential, maybe a bit of a small amount of buzz afterwards.
Yeah.
Noise, perhaps, you know, but it might take people a while to get there. So getting them over that threshold is certainly something to consider. Because I don't buy into the fact that you've got to love every moment of exercise to do it. There aren't that many people. You talk to elite athletes, or even just watch interviews on media. They're going to say when they were climbing up that hill, you know, they were dying and they were in the pain cave. Now that's, no one calls that pleasant, but they love it, you know, and so they go back to do it, and that they were drawn into that, participating in that activity. Well, with something like resistance training, and including HIIT as well, because there's been research from some high-profile researchers that have shown that when you go over a certain threshold of intensity aerobically, anaerobically, as in, you know, running, biking, whatever, it becomes far less pleasant. I don't think anyone would deny that. But if you're doing it in a way that's set up that you're enjoying it for other reasons, and that might not be immediately during the exercise, maybe there's something in that too. So it hurts and it burns and you're breathing and puffing, and that's unpleasant, but hey, you know, you're getting fitter. You feel a sense of reward for doing it. There's some confidence from coming to know that you can do new movements. You're feeling stronger around the house. You notice when you're walking the dog or chasing a recalcitrant teenager, you know, that you're feeling a bit fitter, whatever it is. And I think all of those go into the package for enjoyment. It isn't just immediate love. So I think we have to be careful to say someone's got to love it like a Disneyland to do it, you know, because we're really up against it if that's the case, aren't we?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that's a really, really good take on it, because, yeah, I think often people give off this perception that, you know, I just love exercise, I'm a fitness junkie, but it's not like in the moment we're thinking, wow, this is the peak of pleasure. This is just, I 100% agree. One thing when thinking about, so you've recently been doing, and I think this would be a good kind of topic for us to finish off on, because I think we could probably go on this topic for quite a while, but I guess I'll try and keep it brief. When thinking about how to promote exercise to adolescents or young people, or also I'd love to hear how this translates to the general population. How should we think about the point of exercise? Because I think it's very easy to focus on, I think at least the fitness industry, no fault of its own. I think it does it primarily for marketing purposes. 100% makes sense. It seems to focus a lot on body composition outcomes, you know, muscle growth, fat loss, getting shredded, or things like that. how do you think we should talk about the benefits of exercise and think about them, and how as a society should we look at exercise? Because I think there's a lot of focus on, I'm going to go for a bike ride so I can burn calories. I'm going to go to the gym so I can burn calories and all that kind of stuff. And how do you think we should shift the overall maybe narrative, or at least the conversation?
Yeah, sure. But I mean, I do have to acknowledge that I think a little bit of vanity is going to drive everyone, isn't it? So, changing your body composition in some way is not a bad motivation. It's just if we're setting people up to work towards something they're just not, or have to work so ridiculously hard to get, or compromise other health factors, that's bad. So that's the body image, isn't it? But promoting the fact that exercise makes you look better is certainly not a bad thing, or can help you look better. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? But that will drive a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of people that exercise regularly would, if they reflected, would admit that a little bit of vanity or the desire to have a better physical appearance is part of what motivates them, and that's all good. Keep that. Just don't use it as sort of, the number one factor for adolescents, because it can then lead to potentially the perception that unless you are look like him or her, you're not achieving your best, which shouldn't be the case. So, but I think it has to be around how it makes you feel. But again, it's not just during the exercise, it's as a result of exercising with some regularity. Now, as part of that, it's the environment that you set up. So it's the fun that you have with your mates, it's the social accountability, it's the enjoyment of the music, it's the enjoyment of the function that you get if you play netball or you want to jump higher in basketball, even if you're not, concerned about making the podium, it doesn't matter. So it's around feeling and functioning better and being the best that you can be. I think also it's important not to pitch exercise as heading for the optimal state. There's so much emphasis that I see in social media on achieving optimum. And what's that all about? Like, there are very few people that will ever probably achieve absolute optimum. And so that's the last few percent, and good on them. But you can be very, very high functioning and very fulfilled and happy and healthy without achieving optimum in areas, Is it optimum if I indulge in a banana muffin at my grandma's house? Probably not. Is it optimum if I have a day or two slouching on the couch for whatever reason? Probably not. But we don't have to be optimal to be really well functioning, do we? So it's not about that. It's about feeling good. And so the environment, that for adolescents specifically, certainly the environment, the opportunities that you offer them, that's important. And it's not about this future prospect of health, because let's face it, the prospect of health for the vast majority of adolescents is going to be very quickly in one thick ear and out the other one. I have two older teenagers at home. Health is not something that features, body composition might be, if that's what they perceive. Health is not. So you don't drive it around, you should exercise because it makes you healthier and you need it for a good long, lifelong well-being. If you exercise now, you're going to have better bone mineral density when you're 45. It's not a very sexy message for a teenager, is it? Even though
Unfortunately,
yeah, the bone bank. So it's around how it makes them feel, and the environment, the opportunities that are offered to them. And there are a lot of things that can help promote that with youth. That's for sure. That's the research that I've been doing.
100%. I really love that perspective, because I think it's, as you said, like it's important to acknowledge that body composition can play. Like for me, that's a lot of why I exercise. I want to get more muscle and,
that's all right,
fill out my sleeves. And I think sometimes people, I would hate if society went too far as to say that is narcissistic or that is whatever. And I think it's simply not true. I think it's a form of self-respect. It's like I respect myself enough to make sure I feel and look the best that I can. And that has lengths. Like I wouldn't want to be neurotic about that, but I totally agree with where you're coming from. And I think as you said, especially within younger demographics, I think convincing them that health is important is really, really difficult. And I totally agree.
No, you just don't go there. They don't care about that, they're 14, 15, 16, whatever health, like I'm bulletproof.
You try and explain insulin resistance to them.
Yeah.
Try and say, hey, pre-diabetes, it's, you got to be careful.
Yeah, I have to say with the resistance training, it's really interesting, and including with HIIT in teenagers, a part of it is the self-efficacy they get from it. So unfortunately, a lot of youth are disengaged from structured sport now.
Mm.
And, I think that's really unfortunate, and it's hard to change. But part of the reason for it is the stigmatization and disenfranchisement that they experience in things perhaps like in school. And I'm not criticizing schools for it. It's just a function of the curriculum demands that are placed on them.
Mm.
But if you imagine the kid up the back of the Physique class, and Physique in New Zealand is compulsory up to sort of, around roughly 13, 14 years old equivalent, and they can't pass or catch or kick or whatever, they're going to be even further disenfranchised from that. But if you get them lifting or doing some HIIT with movements they can achieve, that self-efficacy can be a really driving factor too. So the confidence and success that comes from that, you need to set up something where they feel success fairly quickly. And I think that's part of it as well. So, something like resistance training, if it's done in the right way for youth, I think can be really powerful. I also think HIIT's got a lot of potential, and that's been shown in a number of trials. But that doesn't mean that it is a silver bullet for every youth in every situation. And no exercise modality ever is. I think sometimes in exercise science, we can be often guilty of getting into camps, and it's a little bit like you're in the red corner, I'm in the blue corner, and we'll scrap it out to see who wins, and we'll leave the other one behind. And it just shouldn't be like that. It's like exercise and nutrition, isn't it, for weight loss?
Yeah.
You know darn well if exercise was in the red corner and nutrition was in the blue corner, and they went to a fight, nutrition would win knockout blow every time for weight loss. Does that mean we turn our back on exercise for a whole host of reasons? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get in camps like that, and it becomes a bit sort of entrenched. And I think HIIT, unfortunately, has become quite a lot like that, including with youth. Some people are seen as HIIT proponents, or the proponent of name the exercise modality, and they believe in it, so they do trials in it, and they want it to work, and then that's sort of proclaimed as a bit of an answer. Well, it's an option, and if it's shown to work, that's excellent, but that doesn't mean it's the only way, or that we turn our back, for example, on steady state aerobic exercise. Because, for example, HIIT has been shown over many trials to be superior to steady state exercise for cardiovascular fitness, or at least is equivalent to it, but in much less time. Does that mean we should never do steady state, or it's somehow bad for us? No, it doesn't. And so let's not take that approach. Let's look for options and provide those options and see what engages people. And I think for youth, it could be a good option for them. And I think also resistance training. The question is how you reach them. School's a good place to do it, because once they leave, you've got all sorts of other factors to deal with.
Yeah. And I guess, I've definitely been guilty in the past of being too far in terms of resistance training, where the only modality that I would consider was resistance training. And then I realized, oh, wow, I actually do quite enjoy. And then I kind of took a break from that because COVID. And then I realized, oh, wow, I actually love going hiking and things like that. And it's weird how even working within the industry, it's hard to notice when you are in an echo chamber. And I was definitely in an echo chamber. And I didn't realize for a very long time that in the lifting community, it's very easy for people to kind of say, make jokes about cardio, and no matter what form you do it in, they just say, it's silly. You get all your health benefits from lifting.
Yeah, no, see, it's not mutually exclusive, is it, or exclusively superior? And you hear things like steady state cardio makes you fat. Well, the steady state cardio doesn't make you fat. It's all a matter of dose. It's a little bit like nutrition debates. It's one macronutrient or the other. There's no one that's inherently evil as soon as you touch it. I do not drop dead if I eat a piece of chocolate, and I also don't get instantly fat if I do steady state cardio. And so it's a matter of dose for everything and mix, and it's erroneous, and unfortunately can be a little damaging when you get strong charismatic proponents of a particular way of doing things. And as part of doing that, they can tend to then to support their own take on it and make themselves look even more confident in an area as criticize the other. And it just shouldn't be that way, because there are different options, and a lot of them work, and a lot of them work for everyone. So it's not a matter of just doing one thing or the other. Resistance training is awesome. I'm a huge proponent of it. I also love to go for a steady state bike. It's not always steady state when you're going up hills, and some people love running and they're super healthy as long as they do resistance training as well, because running alone is not physically nourishing enough. But I think of all modalities, resistance training certainly has a huge amount of potency, but again, I don't think that means that it is the best way to do things, so you shouldn't do anything else, mix it up.
And I think if the deeper you get into lifting culture, like there are aspects of it that can get very unhealthy. And I think I'm trying to, for myself and my clients and this podcast as like a place for people to converse and listen to conversations, trying to lean more towards, hey, let's like have a more holistic view of health. Let's think about health, not just lifting performance and nothing else, and how much muscle you have as the indicator of health.
Muscle and strength can be pretty consuming, can't they? And you look at the epidemiology, so the research that looks at associations over time and massive numbers of population, 1.5 million people, and the stronger ones are often healthier and don't die, as quickly. So strength is good. Does that mean the stronger you get, the better? Is this strong person who can, deadlift 500 kilos, therefore going to live to 160 years old and never have it? It's not like that. It's just that clearly exerting our muscles strenuously in some way on a reasonably consistent basis is incredibly potent on health. But then so is regular physical activity in terms of low intensity cardiovascular exercise. They both work and they can both be mixed. They're not exclusively superior and they're not mutually exclusive.
100%.
If you're into getting super strong and super massive, so be it. But you could argue that in many ways that could also be negative on health because you're chasing too hard one component at the compromise of others.
Yeah, and I think that very often happens within the lifting community, and I don't think the lifting community wants to acknowledge that too much. So I'm trying to slowly open people up to the conversation because I have the privilege of speaking to high-level bodybuilders and high-level powerlifters, and then if I can foster that community and then slowly bring like, hey, let's think about health as well, not just because it is health and fitness at the end of the day. It's not.
Yeah, and there are massive health benefits from lifting that heavy stuff, but it's about dose and it's about full physical nourishment. So, yeah.
100%. I think that would be a good place for us to end off, but I would like to sort of open the floor to say, is there anything that we touched about that you'd like to reiterate or make clear or something like that?
No, I don't think so, James. I think there were some big questions there, and once I've got the answer, I'll let you know. But I'll be famous. I'll be famous by then. So people get moving. It is good for you, and try to encourage others around you to move. And hey, if you can get people into something a little more structured, then do it. Do it in a way that's fun enough for them to engage in it. Resistance training is certainly part of that. HIIT's also cool, and those two things are often very similar. And so getting moving, getting walking is great, but if you can go beyond that, you'll reap the benefits.
100%. Fantastic. I'll cut this bit out if not, but is there anywhere online that people can find you?
I'm not exactly active on social media. I'm a consumer. I find Twitter is one of the best academic resources ever, actually. Yeah, so I am on Twitter, but I only tweet occasionally. I think, what's my handle? Nigel Harris NZ.
Yeah.
I think, because it's a great way to keep in touch with research and practitioners who offer fantastic stuff. It's not just research. So I'm on Twitter, but I don't think they'd expect too much if they found me there.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I find some of the best researchers they don't focus much on social media. It
takes time and energy, and I sort of I've thought about it, but I thought, well, why don't, at the moment I should share more and contribute to society. I probably will, but at the moment I'm just trying to get some research projects done. So
yeah,